for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Womack, and thank you, Director, for being here, and thank you for your service. And I guess thank you for giving us this report, this information, which is actually a pretty stark warning. A warning that, as you've said, deficits are pretty much growing beyond our control. But what puts the fear in me is that deficits are growing beyond our will to control it. It's almost like we've gotten to a point where we've given up. It's what it feels like. And that's why we're returning to trillion-dollar deficits for the first time since 2012. Our national debt is expected to surpass $31 million by the end of 2030. And the debt service will take up a larger share of the federal spending, leaving less for everything else that we've talked about. And of course, it's going to lead to higher risks of fiscal crises, and hamper our ability to respond to those types of crises. Yet, we're hearing a range of perspectives on our debt and deficits, that we're in a debt emergency and we have to dramatically cut spending today, or that it's a long-term issue and really not something we need to deal with right now. I don't agree with either of those. I do agree with the fact that we need to start developing a plan to combat long-term deficit growth, because I think, as we're seeing, the truth is that neither party, Democrats or Republicans, are doing anything right now to get our fiscal house in order, unfortunately. Doesn't mean we have to forego important investments, okay? We understand that. We don't have to forego infrastructure, our students, our families. But it's clear that our debt will make it harder to continue making these types of worthy investments. And it means that we will need to be fiscally responsible when it comes to our spending, and yes, raise the revenue to do it. It means that we will need a plan to control healthcare costs and prescription drug prices. We will need legislation like the Social Security Act, Social Security 2100 Act, and restore solvency to our Social Security trust funds. And yes, we will need to repeal provisions of the 2017 tax law, which are contributing to our current deficit without providing the growth needed to offset it, and ensure that the wealthy are paying their fair share. And I appreciate what Professor Price said, that everything does need to be on the table when addressing this issue when it comes to our deficit. And that includes us, this committee, putting things on the table. It includes this committee having a role to play. And I do believe that this committee can begin by getting back to passing budget resolutions and discussing ways to reform the budget process. I'm hopeful that we in this committee will take a serious look, not just at the drivers of the deficit, but also explore ways to ensure a fiscally sound policy in the future. Now, that being said, Director, what do you feel this committee can do to reduce future deficit spending?
And of course, I have to start by saying, right, we'll support you, we'll give you the analysis, we won't give you the policies, but you've put your finger on the challenge. And can I just add one, small dimension to it, which in a sense, imagine a policy of pay-go, right, which would be a step, in the direction of fiscal responsibility, but there's also a sense in which by taking off pay-fors, by taking them off the table and spending them, well, that doesn't address the existing challenge, and in some ways makes it more difficult, because then other things have to be done, whether spending or revenue, to address the challenge. And sometimes that's how difficult it is, that pay-go is not enough, and in some ways it makes it more difficult, again, without evaluating the merits or demerits of any particular project.
Understood. Would, in your analysis, so I'll make it easier for you to answer it, in your analysis, would this committee passing a budget resolution or trying to reform the budget process, would that help?
That wouldn't show up directly in the baseline, and of course that would change the way we work, and we would work however the Congress directs us to.
On that note, what do you think of biennial budgeting to reduce deficits? Or biennial appropriating?
Right. So I have not looked at that. We haven't looked at it since I've been director. I recognize in some sense the advantages and disadvantages of giving the Congress more time and space to in some sense think further down the road. And of course the disadvantages of less control in a sense.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate your service, and thanks again, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.